Well, hey there. I'm going off to college this week. I am a little scared. It's the first time I'm going to be away from my parents, first time going to a new church, first time going where I don't know anybody. Will I make friends? How will I do with college work? What happens when I first get sick? And even worse, I have to do my own laundry. Not only that, my extended future. Who will I marry? What am I going to do? I mean, I feel a call to the ministry, but after today, some of you might disagree with that. I'm nervous for the next 30 minutes and how that'll pan out too. Now, how many of you have been fearful and worried for the future? Some of you guys have family members who are sick, and you don't know how you're going to be able to take care of them or afford sending them to a nursing home. Some of you guys are going off to college, and some of you are sending your beautiful, handsome, amazing kids off to school, Mom. Some of you are worried for the future. Some of you guys are worried about your finances. Some of you are worried about your jobs, your retirement. Can you retire? Now, we've all been there. Now, how many of you have heard of David, King David? King David was the second king of Israel. Some say the first true king. Well, David had many, many enemies. You know the story, David and Goliath. He killed the giant. Well, let me list off some of those enemies for you. The Philistines, Moabites, Ammonites, Syrians, Edomites. Worse, his own king, Saul, tried to kill him. And even worse, his own son. The only ites he didn't have to worry about were the termites because he slept in a tent. So, with all these enemies, of course David was afraid. I would be. And he was probably worried for the future. In Psalms 27, he's going through one of these times. In verse 1, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread?" Here David is going through a tough time. One of these enemies is surrounding him. He's worried. He knows God has helped him in the past, but at the same time he realizes the situation at hand. He knows that there's an enemy, but he also remembers what God has done for him in the past. So during that moment of fear, what does David do? And how can we learn from David? So, what is the first thing David does? He remembers God's faithfulness. In verse 2, "When evildoers came upon me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumbled and fell." To devour my flesh is to be defeated, not literally to be devoured, but to be defeated. His enemies came to conquer David, but his adversaries, they stumbled and fell. They were defeated. David was able to defeat his adversaries. But why do we need to remember what God has done for us? It's a biblical principle. Look at Joshua. When they passed through the Jordan River, they placed 12 stones in the river and 12 stones on land, which is a little weird, but the reason they did that was so they could remember how God got them through the Jordan, and so they could remember during their battles, during their conquest, trying to live, they were able to remember how God helped them there, and they were able to trust him. The Passover, when God helped them get out of Egypt, they remembered the Passover, and they were able to look back at how God's faithfulness through that. Luke 22, the Lord's Supper, "And when he had taken some bread and given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, 'This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.'" We just had communion last week. We take that so we can remember that God had his body broken, his blood spilled out for us, so we can remember and move on and trust God. Now, last year, as many of you know, my family had kind of a rough year. It was my senior year. I was taking the ACT like 100 times, had to study for that, was taking college classes, toured over 9 colleges, and was trying to get ready for college. But through all that, we had some losses in my family. Both of my grandmothers passed away, one of them who lived with us. And sitting there at my grandmother's funeral, I put my arm around my great-grandmother, and she went on and passed away 2 months after that. And during all that, my dad had a heart attack. And to top it all off, my 3-legged chihuahua passed away. So it was very difficult. But as I remember how God got us got my family out of that situation and helped us through that very trying time, I was able to look forward to my college and know that God will take care of me. Now, remember what God has done in your life. Salvation. He saved you from death, hell, and the grave. He also saved you from death. When you die, you don't have to worry about what's going to happen, because the worst thing you could do is die, and then after that, you're going to heaven. You don't have to worry about hell anymore. He's protected us. He's blessed us. He's helped you. Some of you guys, he's healed you through really bad sicknesses. He's maybe saved you from a car accident. Every day, helped you through a loss of the loved one, like he did my family and your families. Financial crisis, he's helping us he's helped us through those situations. Major career changes, he's blessings in the past. So when we remember how God has blessed us in the past, we can then trust God in the future. So when we remember how God has blessed us in the past, we can then trust God with the future. The second thing this passage says, verse 3, though a host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. Though war arise against me, in spite of this, I shall be confident. David has many enemies, so he knows there's going to be another time when he's in trouble. So he makes a conscious decision to trust God. He has confidence in the Lord. Now, you can't do what the world does. The world goes and turns its head away from the problem. The world buries its head in the sand. The world turns to addiction, alcohol, drugs, pornography. The world uses stuff to cover itself and protect itself and turn away from the problem. There's a newer branch of theology that says if you deny the problem exists, the problem will go away. If you deny the problem exists, the problem will go away. That's nonsense. That's not how it works. David admitted there was a host against him. He admitted there was a problem, but he knew God could handle it. So he trusted God with his future. He had plenty of opportunity to turn away and be afraid, but he didn't deny the issue. Instead, he trusted God, and he knew God would take care of him. It's not the power of positive thinking, but the power of God. Proverbs 3, 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. When you put your trust in God, he will take care of you. When you trust him, he will clear your path for you. And just as I had a difficult year last year and God got me through that, I know he will get me through my freshman year of college, and not only that, the rest of my life. Now, in elementary school, I heard about this guy named George Mueller. I remember watching a VeggieTale episode about this guy, and I remember loving his story, and I heard it in Sunday school, and I learned more about him. His name was George Mueller. He was an excellent example of putting his faith in God. Here, let me read this story for you. The children are dressed and ready for school, but there is no food for them to eat. The house mother of the orphanage informed George Mueller. George asked her to take the 300 children into the dining room and have them sit at the tables. He thanked God for the food and waited. George knew God would provide food for the children, as he always did. Within minutes, a baker knocked on the door. "Mr. Mueller," he said, "last night I could not sleep. Somehow I knew that you would need bread this morning. I got up and baked 3 batches for you. I will bring it in." Soon there was another knock at the door. It was the milkman. His cart had broken down in front of the orphanage. The milk would spoil by the time the wheel was fixed. He asked George if he could use some free milk. George smiled as the milkman brought in 10 large cans of milk. It was just enough for the 300 thirsty children. See, when George Mueller was in college, he couldn't pay for his tuition. He didn't know what he's going to do. So out of desperation, and he sat down, he goes, this is probably really weird. So he sat down, got on one knee, and said, Lord, please help me. I can't do this on my own. He felt really weird, but he did it anyway. He trusted in the Lord. He gave his future to the Lord. Well, the next day, someone met up with him and said, hey, someone's looking for a job. Someone needs someone to work for him. And that paid he got a job, and it paid for his tuition all the rest of his college. And from that moment, George Mueller decided to give trust in the Lord and trust God with everything. And that's how he was able to take care of over 10,000 children throughout the span of the orphanage. Now, as you remember God's faithfulness, just as George Mueller remembered his college experience and David remembered his past experiences with the Lord, will you trust him with your future? Right now, if you have fears, trials, troubles, heartaches, will you make that conscious decision, just as David and George Mueller did, to trust God with your future? Why was God so faithful to David? Why was he so faithful to George Mueller? Can just anyone trust God with their future? The answer is no. We've talked about looking back, and we've talked about looking forward, but what do we do at that moment of fear? What do we do in the present when we have that moment of fear? Verse 4, one thing I have asked from the Lord that I shall seek, that I might dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to meditate in his temple. So just as David was seeking God, we need to pursue Christ. Pursue Christ. What was David doing in his moment of fear? He was asking to dwell with God, actively seeking Christ, seeking God's will and enjoying God's presence. He was able to enjoy being with God in that moment of fear. When enemies were around him, he was still able to enjoy being with God. In Matthew 6:33, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Seek God and he will take care of you. Now, when fear closes in, we need to seek refuge in the presence of God. Tune out the world, seek his will, and study his word, and pray, 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 pray. That's what David was doing. That's what prayer is. Prayer is seeking God, not running to Oprah, not running to some self-help guru, not getting all introspective, but he was trusting in the Lord. Now, we've looked back at God's faithfulness in the past. We've made the decision to trust him for our future. And at that moment of fear, we seek his presence. In the presence, we seek his presence. Now, what happens when we do this? The first thing God does. The second thing is what our response should be. When you seek God and pursue him, God will protect us. It's not if he will protect us, you must know he will protect us. Because he's taken care of us in the past. He's taken care of us through all the trials and tribulations. He helped us in the past. We can know beyond a shadow of the doubt he will protect us in the present. Verse 5, for in the day of trouble he will conceal me in his tabernacle, in the secret place of his tent. He will hide me. He will lift me up on a rock. And now my head will be lifted up above my enemies around me. So what is God doing in this passage? And what will he do for us? He conceals him and hides us. He hides us from our enemies. He protects us. And not only that, he will lift us up above our enemies, which is victory. He lifts us up and gives us a victory over our enemies. Because George Mueller prayed and actively pursued God, the Lord provided all the needs and the needs of the orphanage. God protects those who seek him. 2 Thessalonians 3:3. But the Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen and protect you from the evil one. When we remember the faithfulness of God, when we trust him with our future, when we seek him in our present circumstances, he will come through. That's what God does. He will come through. Now, when God does all this, what should we do in response? Because Christ protects us, because he does all these things for us, because he saved us, we will praise Christ. We will praise Christ. 6b, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises to the Lord. Here is the most solid of biblical principles. When God acts, we should respond with thanksgiving, praise, and obedience to God. Because he's done all these things for us, we should respond and praise him. So as I go off to college this week, I go a little nervous, but confident that Christ will take care of me in my freshman year. I know he will get me through all the tough times, the late night projects. He will get me through all that. Just as he did last year, getting my family through that tough year, helping me finish my senior year and through that. I know he will help me complete my freshman year of college well because he helped me. Isaac Watts' great hymn summarizes what Psalm 27 has taught us today. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Knowing God has been faithful in the past, we will trust him with our future. Knowing God has been faithful in the past, we will trust him with our future. Today, maybe you have a reason to fear. Maybe you have a loved one who's struggling. Maybe your spouse is sick and you don't know how you're going to handle it. Or you're sick and you don't know how the next year is going to unfold. Maybe you're going off to school. But you can know, beyond a shadow of doubt, God will take care of you. Maybe some of you haven't made that first step and you need to trust the Lord today. Trust him with your heart. Know that he saved you and give your life to God. But for those of you who have made that step today, remember what God has done for you. Remember all the times that he's blessed you. He's gotten you out of difficult times, and you can trust him with your future. As Ashley sings today, will you remember God's faithfulness and trust him with your future?